everyone here thinks that the grass is greener on the other side, so abroad, that everything is good, everything is milk and honey. And since you got an opportunity to go there, like, why would you ever want to come back?
So when you talk about depopulation, the thing that everybody thinks about is, okay, what can we do to increase the numbers of people? So it means encouraging families to have more babies, or stopping people from leaving. And so part of the focus that we've had is, can we create opportunities for redefining Serbia as a place where people can thrive?
What matters is not so much the head count, but what is in the heads. Really, what is the skills of people, and a smaller population with highly skilled people can produce much higher quality of life for these people, can even have a bigger impact on the global scale, can do economically better.
So tech is a good example of where a sector where diaspora, people, the 4 million or so people who've left Serbia, would actually come back. We're looking at aging. More and more we realize that old people aren't just a burden on the state and a burden on pension and health systems, but can actually be a very productive part of society.
One of the great assets in this country is the topsoil. It is amongst the most fertile in the whole European region, if not the most. So agriculture, of course. And we have an interesting convergence of a tech community with the assets of soil and agriculture. So could we reimagine what that is and think about how do you build a thriving society around that?
Although we are looking at population dynamics, we are going to be looking at many different aspects, many different sectors, and so we are going to hit many indicators of at least half a dozen, if not more, SDGs. And that's exactly what we want to do in the context of accelerating the realization of SDGs.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Good morning, colleagues. I hope you can hear me well. I'm Mirjana Spoljaric. I'm Assistant Administrator of the United Nations Development Programme, and very happy and honored to be here today and to moderate the panel on depopulation challenge, shaping the future, social, political, and economic landscape. I also want to seize the opportunity to congratulate the organizers on the Jubilee. This is the 10th anniversary of the Belgrade Security Forum. And even though, given the circumstances, we have to hold it virtually, it is still a very important regional event. So I thank you for the opportunity again to be here. And I just want to say at the outset that what we are discussing today is a challenge that is very well understood by all the citizens of the Western Balkans and in particular of Serbia. I myself was born in the region and I'm very aware of what depopulation means in the daily life of the people, particularly in rural areas. So clearly there is a significant anxiety around this issue, both in Serbia and throughout the region, and this is for good reasons. Of the 17 countries that have experienced a sustained population growth decline in the last 30 years, and this also signifies that depopulation is not a new phenomenon, it's just reaching new levels. Every single one of these countries that have experienced population decline are located in Eastern Europe. Now, this region is experiencing a mix of low fertility, much like the rest of Europe, but in particular a high net immigration rate that is more like developing countries are experiencing today. So the combination of the two has a significant impact, not only on the macroeconomic situation in the region and in Serbia in particular, but also on the social and political development of the future. I'm very pleased now to have very distinguished panelists today, very informed ones that will help us make sense of all of this. I'm particularly welcoming Ivo Belet, a former member of the European Parliament and Deputy Head of Cabinet to the European Commission, Vice President in charge of Democracy and Demography. I'm welcoming my partner and co-host of this event, Alanna Armitage, the UNFPA Regional Director for Eastern Europe and Central Asia. I'm also welcoming Darrell, Global CEO of IPSOS Public Affairs and author of a best-selling book, Empty Planet, on the shock of global population decline. And I'm welcoming Tim Judah, journalist at The Economist and recent author of a series of articles on the demographic state of Western Balkan countries, which started off by a piece called Bye Bye Balkans. Now, most of you speak of depopulation in terms of a crisis happening. And I want to start by unpacking that and give the floor to Darrell. I want to know why your work implies almost an end of humanity and what it is about your research that points to this type of conclusion. Over to you, Darrell.
Well, thank you very much for the invitation, and thank you very much to the Belgrade Security Forum and to the UNDP for bringing this panel together. I'm actually quite excited to meet some other people who are interested in this topic. It tends to be at times an obscure topic where we get buried in a lot of dense tables and dense statistics, but the trends honestly are really, really clear. Now, when John Ebbetson and I wrote the book Empty Planet, the title was not meant to be literal. I mean, we don't actually think that the planet is going to empty. And obviously, human beings are still going to be present on the face of the earth, but Somewhat Empty Planet was not really a great title, so we didn't go with that. So it's a bit more provocative. But the trends are undeniable, and Serbia is at the front end of dealing with of what's going on. First of all, global fertility is collapsing. I mean, there's no doubt about that. It's not just a Serbian problem. It's not just a Balkans problem. This is something that is happening worldwide. If you think Serbia's got issues, you should take a look at China and what's going on there right now. Our population is aging, and our ability to reverse this trend because our population is aging, unless we change basic human biology, is becoming less and less possible. Nobody has found an effective way to reverse this trend. It's basically driven by a combination of urbanization and education, particularly the education of women. It's actually a pretty positive story when it comes to the empowerment of women. So there's aspects of this that are actually quite heartening, where fertility is really becoming more a matter of choice than it is something that's imposed on people as it may have been in the past. So there's a lot of good aspects to this, but the outcome of all of this is that we're going to have to get used to very much what was discussed in the opening film, which I thought put the best possible spin on this, that we're going to be living with a shrinking population, an aging population, an increasingly urban population, and the trends that are taking place are actually taking place faster now than I would say that that the UNDP is recognizing in its statistics. For example, I just looked up this morning just to get ready for this. What the UN is predicting is going to happen between 2020 and 2050 in Serbia. And if there's anybody on this call who actually believes that the fertility rate of Serbia is going to go from 1.4 to 1.6, I'd really like to hear what your reasoning is behind that, because the trends are obviously headed in the other direction. Anyway, those are my opening comments. I'd be pleased to hear from the other panelists. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Darrell. Let me turn to Ivo Belet. And what we have just heard in the brief introduction from Darrell is that, you know, the shrinking of a population is both positive and a challenge. But what we will see in the Western Balkans is a shrinking and a predominantly urban and possibly also elderly population in the coming decades. So is this the reason why Brussels and the European Commission is beginning to focus on that issue? Are there other elements to this? And what do we receive as a signal by the fact that Brussels is now introducing a commissioner for demography? Over to you, Ivo.
Thanks very much, Mirjana, and I hope that you can hear me very clearly without the echo that we were confronted with during the test in the beginning. So I hope everyone can hear us. And very good morning from the Belet building in Brussels. As a starter, and to build on what Darrell has been saying, indeed, let's not lose out of sight that we're dealing with an issue, with a challenge that a lot of countries worldwide are confronted with. Darrell referred to China, we can refer to Japan, Europe, of course, and some countries are affected more than others. And as you have been saying, Mirjana, the fact that European Commission President has attributed for the first time in the history of the European Union, has attributed a clear portfolio on demography towards a Vice President of the European Commission is an important signal. And I would like to use the opportunity to apologize, Vice President Dubravka Šuica, because this forum is coinciding with the plenary session of the European Parliament. Normally it takes place in Strasbourg, but due to COVID-19 circumstances, it takes place in Brussels. So, and this is always a very, very busy week, and combined with the busy. From that, in her particular guidelines last year, the President of the Commission, Ursula von der Leyen, clearly has said, and I quote, that changes in climate, in technology, and in demography are transforming our societies, also in Europe, also on the Western Balkans, and that's why there is this particular portfolio for Vice President Šuica. So a few words on the key demographic trends. Let me use this opportunity to put into highlight this report, which is rather recent. It's called the Report on the Impact of Demographic Change, that has been adopted by the College of the European Commission just before the summer. And to start with a positive note on the basis of this report, of course, we are living longer and healthier lives overall. So this is the positive note. Life expectancy is increasing, as we all know, but it's good to remind us all of the figures. Life expectancy at birth has increased by about 10 years for both men and women over the last 5 decades. So let's not forget to mention this positive sign. But as Darrell has been saying, Europeans do not have enough children, and it has also been mentioned in the introductory film. Europeans do not have enough children to guarantee a stable population, and the increase of Europe's population over the last years is due to immigration into the European Union. So the working age population is also shrinking, as Darrell already has been saying. So we have to find ways to sustain economic growth in order to tackle this challenge. And that is exactly why we are working on these demographic challenges with this report. This is the first materialized policy document that came out. We will build on this one. So we are preparing a green paper on aging, which will be launched like in the beginning, in spring 2021, and which is the basis for a broad consultation across the European Union, across the Western Balkans, in order to involve all stakeholders, all civil society organizations, in order to come on board with concrete proposals. And on basis of that, we will come, of course, with policy proposals. And at the same time, I see that you're also preparing to raise the subject of long-term, of the rural areas. So we're also preparing, next to the report on demographic change, next to the upcoming green paper, we're also preparing a vision, a long-term vision, but with very concrete, tangible proposals with regard to the rural areas in the European Union and on the Western Balkans that are confronted with that double challenge of demographic decline on the one hand and a GDP decrease on the other hand. So we're looking into ways in order to tackle that double challenge. So I'll stick to this for my introductory notes and happy to come back later on. Mirjana, back to you.
Thank you, Ivo. And from UNDP's and UNFPA's perspective, we are very glad that the EU has made this a priority, also for enlargement countries in the Western Balkans. And I also want to flag that next week, the German presidency of the Council is organizing an event to address youth migration, which is also important to us, and at which UNDP will participate and contribute to the discussion. Now, what we have heard is you referring to the impact on GDP and economic growth that population decline has in negative terms. But you're also mentioning measures like rural development, which are, taking us away from the mere focus on fertility. And this makes me turn to my colleague Alanna Armitage from UNFPA, the UN's Population Fund. Because for most of the fund's history, Alanna, and you're more familiar with that than I, UNFPA has been advising countries on how to manage exploding populations, and that was at the origins of the fund. So when was the first time that you were actually approached by a country or your teams to drive up fertility rates? Over to you.
Well, thank you so much, Mirjana, and good afternoon, everyone from Istanbul. UNFP is very pleased to be here at the Belgrade Security Forum and partner with UNDP in organizing this very exciting panel focused on solutions to the region's population challenges. And I think we've already heard some great, provocative thoughts from Darrell Bricker, and thank you, Darrell, for pointing out also some of the positive aspects of what we call depopulation. Mr. Belet, also great overview on the EU perspective and the report on demographic change. We are really pleased with our recent collaboration with the EU on demographic challenges and our cooperation with the Office of the Commission of Vice President for Demography and Democracy. So, Mirjana, first of all, let me just say that contrary to what may be perceived, UNFPA has actually been addressing concerns with population decline and low fertility for quite some time. And that's because anxiety around population change and population decline is not a new phenomenon. Fears around population disappearing, similar to what we heard in that video at the outset, is nothing new, really. France is a classic example. In the late 19th century France, many politicians and even demographers that were concerned with France's low birth rate predicted that France would virtually disappear by 1965. And today, of course, we know the French population is about 67 million, or the population of France is 67 million. Ireland is another great example. Its population shrunk by close to 60% between 1841 and 1961. Today, Ireland's population is around 5 million, less than it was when it reached its peak, but with a very strong economy that now ranks as one of the world's highest on the Human Development Index. It's number 3, just after Norway and Switzerland, which are both relatively small countries in terms of population, by the way. So my first point is that it is not all doom and gloom. Countries facing population decline are not destined to disappear. 6 of the 10 countries with the highest human development rankings have populations under 10 million. Having said that, at UNFPA, we do take concerns around the demographic change that's happening in Eastern Europe very seriously. And as you said at the outset, Mirjana, there is no other region today more affected by this change. 9 of the world's 10 fastest shrinking countries are in Eastern Europe. And of course, if a large country shrinks by a few million people, it's arguably not such a big issue. But if a smaller country like Moldova or Bulgaria loses a few million people, the implications can be dramatic. Bosnia and Herzegovina, for example, lost more than a quarter of its population since 1990. And this has been particularly acute among health personnel. We know that for every 6 doctors in Bosnia and Herzegovina now, 1 works in Germany. So what are governments primarily worried about? They are concerned about the effects of population decline for the economy, social systems, and infrastructure, fewer people to drive economic growth, fewer workers to contribute to social security and caring for an aging population, and fewer residents in sparsely populated areas, making it costly to run schools or hospitals or other essential services. UNFPA has worked closely with many governments to advise them on how to address demographic change. And here I'd like to get to my second point, which is that we really, and you said it already, Mirjana, we really need to move beyond narrow, quick fix approaches focused on population numbers towards comprehensive population and social policies aimed at unleashing the potential of human capital. So in terms of policy response in our region, for too long, we've really seen policies trying to focus on increasing fertility, boosting birth rates. Governments have tried various pronatalist schemes to provide financial incentives to entice people to have more children, but the results have been mixed at best. We do know that there's a gap between the number of children people want in our region and the number of children they actually have. So how do we close this gap? I think that's a very important question, and evidence suggests that a comprehensive policy mix with a strong foundation in gender equality is most likely to ensure that people are able to have the number of children that they would like to have. And that is why UNFPA support to many of the governments in our region are focused on enhancing rights and choices, ensuring access to sexual and reproductive health and rights, promoting gender equality and social inclusion of marginalized groups, developing gender-responsive family policies, enabling young people to succeed, and tapping into the skills of older persons. My final point, Mirjana, is that demographic challenges are an opportunity to build more vibrant societies. Eastern Europe doesn't have a population crisis. It faces overlapping social, political, and economic challenges that have demographic consequences. So this means that to tackle demographic change, countries have an opportunity to make progress on good governance, making economies more competitive, matching individual skills and labor market demands, and it requires a set of specific policies responding to the needs of families, women, men, and children. So this is why we see more and more countries, like, for example, Serbia, looking at a more holistic and innovative solutions. So there is a lot we can do to get future ready. We really need to move away, I think, from sulking in doomsday scenarios and approach this challenge constructively and innovatively. And I think as more and more countries are facing the prospect of population decrease, Southeastern Europe could be at the forefront of finding solutions for the new demographic realities we're seeing all over the world and developing models that others could follow. Back to you, Mirjana. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Alanna. Let me turn to Tim Judah, because you have been researching the Balkans for over 20 years, and primarily from a political spectrum or with a political focus. What drew your attention to depopulation, and how do you see it playing out in a region and in Serbia in particular? And coming back to the term of crisis that they used in the beginning, why does this make you worried? Tim, over to you.
Well, thank you very much. I hope you can hear me. Yes, you're right. As a journalist, I've covered this region and especially the Western Balkan 6 countries for a very long time. But I have to say that it began to get quite boring. I mean, it began to get really kind of like Groundhog Day, just doing the same stories endlessly, about Bosnia is dysfunctional, Kosovo-Serbia dispute, elections, corruption, organized crime, autocracy, who's filling the gap? Are the Russians arriving, the Turks, or the Chinese? So I thought I would look at something else, which was this question of demography, depopulation, and immigration. And what I found was that although people mentioned it and talked about it, actually there was very little kind of hard data at hand. I mean, there is hard data, but it just took a lot of time it takes time to get to it, to do the work. And so people were writing and saying things which were basically kind of not true, or kind of over dramatic or under dramatic. So that's why, thanks to a fellowship at IWM Vienna, I was able to start this research. Now, the reason that I find it quite dramatic is, I mean, you just have to look at the figures. I mean, Alanna mentioned that Bosnia has lost a quarter of its population since 1990. Serbia has lost 9%, Bulgaria 21%, Romania 17%, and Moldova has already lost a third of its population. And if you project forward by 2050, Moldova will be home to 45% less people compared to 1990. Bulgaria 39% less, Romania 30%, Albania 25%, Croatia 24%, Bosnia 37%, and Serbia by a quarter. I mean, yeah, of course, like everybody, I'm all in favor of kind of looking for the upsides, but I have to say that I'm not that optimistic. And when you look at Europe as a whole, yes, Mr. Belet, I've read your report, but it doesn't really talk about one of the most serious problems, which is, it talks about kind of Europe or the EU 27 as a whole, but it's not talking about one of the most serious problems, which is, people are emigrating from one side of Europe and filling up that low fertility gap on the other side of Europe. And that's something that has to be addressed. I mean, we can't just pretend it's not happening, because it's already having political ramifications. I think that there's a good argument for saying that Brexit is in part a result of that. You having with Romanians and Bulgarians and Poles coming to Britain, enough people were annoyed about it, for whatever, right or wrong. That's not the issue here. But that emigration has a political consequence, and it's going to have political consequences, or it does have political consequences in the eastern side of Europe as well. So, yes, I am concerned about it. And, yes, Ireland is interesting. But, at the end of the day, like, people did live for 150 years in an extremely poor country that they wanted to get away from. And the fact is that, yes, in 1841, the population of Ireland peaked at whatever it was. But, it's only been better in the last 20 years. It still took 150 years to get there. And, ask any Moldovans whether, has, having a smaller population been a great advantage? Well, I don't think many Moldovans will think that, having a smaller population is a great advantage. And I think we have this kind of reverse compound interest problem, is that it kind of can get worse. You get into a spiral, and then more people leave, and then you have this catch-22 problem. Serbia, Moldova, the whole region needs its young people, its skilled people. And, if they stayed, they would make Serbia and Moldova and other countries, great places to live. But, are you as an individual prepared to spend your whole life, waiting for that to happen? I mean, Bulgaria kind of average salaries of 574 euros, in Albania 316, in Germany they're 2,360 euros a month, Switzerland 4,502. Even in Hungary it's 688 euros. You only have to go across the border and it's 1,848 euros. So, like, people are not going to wait around for these good things to happen. So that's my first words.
Thank you. Thank you, Tim, and thanks for raising the issue also of why are people staying in the country and what motivates them to leave. So there is a push out of certain countries, and in particular push out of Eastern Europe, whilst there's a pull into countries in the West, and we have to get to the core of the problem. And the problem isn't as easy. What we know from your interventions and from research, and as you said, Tim, there's not much reliable data. But from what we know, Eastern Europe is leading the list of countries with a declining population. And some of the countries in Southeast Europe may lose a quarter to half of the population in the coming decades. But what we've also heard from Alanna, it can be tackled by looking at fertility rates alone. We heard Ivo on the impact on economic growth. We also see the political impact that this has on the countries, the governments, and the societies. So why have we taken this up together with UNFPA as the UN Development Programme and as the biggest development actor in the UN system? It is because we want to understand what depopulation really means, and we want to start with the question why, and we want to hear everybody on the issue, on the economic impact, on the political impact, and on the social impact. But we also want to understand the multiple root causes that this has. It is not one reason why people leave the country. It's many reasons why people leave the country. So the response to that has to be a complex one as well. And the response to that cannot be by either just focusing on economic growth or rural development or how many children a woman has. We have to ask ourselves how many children one families have and what is the future population size of the countries in the region that they need to plan for, and what is the composition of the population going to be. Now, what we want to come up with is a human-centered approach. We want to put the individuals at the center, and we want to, starting from them, advise governments to design a palette of possible responses by moving away from targeting fertility and reducing immigration towards focusing on raising the productivity of each individual, the attractiveness of the labor market, and the attractiveness of the future of the country and the environment that the people want to live in. Now with this, and because much of this is summarized in a report that is today going to be launched by UNDP and UNFPA as part of our Human Development Series, I'm very happy to announce that in cooperation with the world-renowned demographer Wolfgang Lotz, we are issuing the first series on depopulation as a policy challenge in the context of global demographic trends. And this new study, and I very much want to entice you to read it, tells us that the population composition is more consequential than simply its size, and that the smaller population does not have to be the defining factor of a country in economic or geopolitical considerations. Instead, the report that we are issuing proposes that strengthening the national human resource base should be at the crux of a comprehensive policy response. But this requires integration at the top government level. All the different parts of government and society have to work together to tackle this issue. And I really look forward to hearing the second round of inputs, but then also turning to the questions from the audience. But let me turn back to Tim. How do you view Balkan policymakers' engagement on this issue, given what I've just said, that this requires integration and this requires political determination? Where do you see a priority for the governments in the region and in Serbia in particular? Tim, over to you.
Well, I do think that governments and policymakers in Serbia and across the region, clearly realise and know that this is, a serious issue, but I think it's also quite difficult for smaller countries in Western Balkans and Eastern Europe to there's a limited amount you can do when you have a kind of giant like Germany, which is basically kind of vacuuming up, people, and who's simply where quality of life is much better, and you get paid a lot more. And I think that although, we can talk about a palette of things that can be done, that's all fine. But at the end of the day, it's not rocket science. It's like, just make countries that people want to live in. People want to go to Darrell's Canada because it's a nice place to live and it's a good place to live. It's like, it's not rocket science. Like, when I was in Belgrade last January or February, you could hardly breathe because of the smog. It was just absolutely terrible. But so, just deal with all these, all the problems that we know are there, familiar and boring things like job security for women, as I say, environment, pay, corruption. I mean, we know all the stuff. We know what needs to be done. Governments just need to do that. Part of the problem, of course, is that these things may take, 10, 20, 30 years, a generation, and those things are, not great if you're a politician who wants to be elected in 2 years' time. But it's as I say, it's not rocket science. We know what needs to be done.
Thank you, Tim. So it's addressing the future of the population and the future of the demands and requirements, but it's also long-term planning. I think this is something very important, and it goes beyond the term of one government. It goes beyond the term of several governments as well. But let me turn now to Mr. Belet. Ivo, we have a question from the audience, which says, as Mrs. Schweitzer is also in charge of the conference on the future of Europe, and we in the EU constantly repeat that the future of the Western Balkan countries is in the EU. Should they not be duly involved in the conference, as the then acceding countries were at the time of the European Convention in the early 2000s? This would finally turn nice words into deeds, and it would also meet the expectations of the European Parliament, as expressed most recently in its June 2020 recommendation to the Western Balkans. Over to you.
Thanks very much, Mirjana, for that question. And it's an excellent question. And I'm very glad that you're putting it on the table, because, of course, Vice President Schweitzer has two main issues in her portfolio, which is like a new pioneering portfolio. Demography on the one hand, which I already explained is new, the demographic challenge, and on the other hand, the Conference on the Future of Europe, which we are hoping to launch in the upcoming weeks under the German presidency. It has been postponed a little bit due to the circumstances of COVID-19. Of course, we are looking to involve citizens in European policy making. And when you want to involve citizens, you want to do it in a physical way, and not only hybrid or remotely or via Zoom or whatever. But okay, we have to move on. We will do it in a hybrid way in the first phase, and then move on also with physical meetings in the future. But to respond to your question, the European Commission has committed itself to ensure that there is a place for the countries of the Western Balkans at the table of the forthcoming conference on the future of Europe. That has been confirmed by the president, and it remains high on our priority list. Allow me to use this question also to give a short answer to what Darrell said about the report on demographic change. Indeed, sorry, it was Tim who mentioned it, sorry, and mentioning the fact that not all is mentioned in this report. This is true, because this is a mapping report, and it is the first report in a whole chain of initiative that will come up. As I already explained, it will be followed by a green consultation paper, and that will be followed by a plan for rural areas, etc. So the other initiatives are in the pipeline and will come up. So next steps are foreseen. What is the best answer to people emigrating from Bosnia and from even Bulgaria and from Serbia to places like Germany or Belgium or Holland? The best answer is it's a complex one, as Alanna already mentioned, but it's also a question of investment. I've been looking in front of me here the economic and investment plan for the Western Balkans. That plan is like 2 weeks old, and it contains a lot of not only money but a lot of good proposals in order for concrete investments in the Western Balkans. This is not about investing in 10 or 20 years. This is about investments like tomorrow. And we're talking about a lot of money. So the amount of money that the European Union will invest in the Western Balkans for the upcoming 7 years is like 9 billion directly. And by means of financial guarantees that could be and should be increased up to 20 billion euros in the upcoming 7 years, which is a lot of money. And we're talking about connectivity, we're talking about infrastructure, we're talking about clean energy. You referred, Tim, to the fact that Belgrade is full of smog, and of course, perhaps not Brussels, but Toronto or other cities have cleaner air and it's nicer to live. Indeed, this investment plan is about the twin digital and green transition that we want to roll out in the European Union and also on the Western Balkans. So this is about a lot of money. I think this is the best way to give a clear signal to young people, to all citizens of the Western Balkans, that we are ready to invest in that region and that we are looking forward to give them, to guarantee them that European perspective towards the Western Balkans. Back to you, Mirjana.
Thank you, Ivo. I'm just picking up the last element on green transition and linking that back to what Tim said. What we have to be aware of, and again, that's why we need a palette of solutions, is, you know, linking that green transition to create jobs and to create a productive labor market and business environment, but also to reduce the environmental impact that, Tim, you mentioned also is potentially also driving people out. So the European Commission is speaking about climate refugees as well as other types of migration. I now want to turn to Darrell and look a little bit at the Canadian experience and you know, draw lessons from that and combine it maybe with a question we have received from the audience, which is, in Serbia, we are hearing more and more frequently that the problem is not that people are leaving, but that they are not coming back. We have had a comment from the Prime Minister, Ana Brnabić, that Serbia will aspire towards the promotion of circular migration. So do you think that this is plausible from the Canadian experience, but also from other countries that you've been observing? And if so, in which case do you see the people returning to Serbia in the Western Balkans? Darrell, over to you.
Thank you. Can you hear me? Can you hear me now? If the Canadian experience is one that we're going on, I wouldn't be counting on people circulating back to where they were from. When people make the commitment of immigrating, they tend to immigrate and they tend to stay. The Canadian experience, I think, is one that sometimes is misunderstood by a lot of people in the sense that they believe that immigration in Canada is similar to what it is in Europe, where there's a lot of refugees, there's a lot of poverty driving people to make these changes in terms of where they live. The Canadian experience isn't that at all. In fact, the percentage of refugees that we bring into Canada is actually quite small. Essentially, what Canada does, it's the country in the world that probably leads, given any year, in terms of the percentage of the population that we bring in. We have 1% of our entire population every year through immigration, but it's recruiting. We actually bring in people who are capable of speaking the language, capable of succeeding economically quickly, and they've made an extreme contribution to Canada. But for anybody to believe that this is a response to, in a compassionate way to what's going on in the world, it's not at all. It's very, very self-interested. Now, Canada has the one thing that many of the countries that we're talking about here don't have, and that's an ability to actually absorb a fair amount of immigration without political and social strife as a result of it. If you want to talk about what the rise of nationalism is in the world, one of the biggest factors driving it has been immigration. So there are many countries in the world in which solving the population problem, and by the way, it's interesting that we talk about people going back and forth. The real issue in the countries that are more desirable, like Germany, for example, or even France or the UK, places that people go, is they also have population problems that they're trying to solve through immigration. So this idea that it's just these people deciding that they're going off to these places and then maybe they'll go back. Well, no, actually there's a population problem that exists in all of these other places that they're trying to follow, I guess, either the Australian or the Canadian example, where they try to deal with it through some form of immigration and attracting popular places. So as I see the population trends that we're talking about, and by the way, it is refreshing to have a conversation with 4 people who actually accept that this is happening. Because normally most panels I go on, it's me having to convince people that this is actually happening. That world population is starting to shrink. In fact, it's going to shrink way faster than most people are assuming, and that the structure of the population is changing, how fast we're aging, how fast people are moving from rural to urban areas. Usually I spend the first, if I'm asked 3 questions during the course of a panel, the first 3 questions trying to convince people, very smart people, that all of this is going on, because there's a lot of denial that happens over this. And the other denial part of this is that the places that these people are going to are also experiencing population problems, and they're trying to solve it through immigration. So while people may say nice things about the fact that they're going to try and make other places great places to live, I wonder what the incentive is for that to actually happen if you live in Germany, where they're going to be struggling with trying to find workers over the period of the next couple of decades. And the one word that we haven't introduced to this conversation that I think we should really introduce is the word COVID. And it's going to accelerate everything that we're talking about. If we think fertility rates are bad now in places like, how many people are actually planning to have children right now in the midst of an economic or a health pandemic and an economic calamity that's going on? Children are an expression of hope. People are really, and I'm a pollster for a living, so I do a lot of work on public opinion. I've never public opinion as down as it is right now in terms of economic confidence. So everything that we're talking about is going to accelerate. Immigration is potentially going to accelerate once we can get it started again. All of these trends are going to continue to accelerate.
Thank you, Darrell, and thanks for bringing up COVID as well. It is bringing to the fore all underlying issues that we knew before in the context of development that we will need to tackle. But what we also see, and of course we do not deny the question of depopulation and the fact of depopulation, because it is one of the most complex development challenges of the future. But it is also a challenge that helps us address many related factors at once if we do it smartly. So instead of stopping out migration or trying to focus again on fertility rates alone, we need to see the whole spectrum of actions that need to be taken, and that requires smart policies and smart frameworks going forward and smart incentives. We have heard from Ivo that a lot of money is going to come into the Western Balkans, but if this money is not invested smartly, it will not have an impact. So we are not stopping out migration, we are not stopping population growth, but we are planning for the future by knowing what to expect and how to best possibly address it. And that we need to find out, and that we need to collaborate on, because one entity alone is not going to figure it out, and one government alone is not going to be able to fix the problem. So while UNFPA is bringing to the table the expertise, the demographic knowledge, and the data, UNDP has the capacity and operational presence on the ground to design development solutions that address complex challenges and bring in all relevant actors. So we are multi-stakeholder and multi-dimensional at the same time, addressing the future of development. How do we do this? Alanna, over to you.
Well, thank you. Thanks, Mirjana. I fully agree with everything you say, and I think the partnership is the key to all of this. And it's wonderful to have this panel, this rich panel, bringing up all different issues. Well, and you mentioned, our partnership, and that reminds me of the joint work that we're doing in Serbia, which I think is a fascinating case study, because Serbia is one of the countries that has understood that we need to approach demographic change from a holistic manner. And what we're exploring in Serbia really is a new way of looking at population issues, moving away from defining population only in terms of numbers. I agree completely with Tim, and Tim and I have had some conversations. We don't always agree on everything, but I certainly agree that people aren't going to be waiting around for good things to happen. They need to happen, and they need to happen as soon as possible. I totally agree with him that the answer is to make places that people want to live in. That's really what it's about, and it's about the investments that Ivo spoke about. So we need to create an environment where many more people are integrated and can flourish so that they can be active members of society, contributing to the common good rather than being on the sidelines. Let me give you a couple of concrete examples that some of the panelists have already raised. The issue of young people. Of course, young people are key. It's often young people who are leaving because they don't find the opportunities they need at home. So creating opportunities for young people is crucial. Economic opportunities, but also opportunities to create a family. And as so many young people are already abroad, finding ways to engage the diaspora back home, bringing back their knowledge and expertise, of course, is also a priority. Second, women. Study after study demonstrates that the huge economic effects of integrating women into the labor market. But that requires quality, affordable childcare from an early age, not starting at 3 years old, but from the beginning. We need much better arrangements for both men and women to combine work and family. And then older people. Countries all over the world are aging. We've spoken about that. Southeastern Europe is no exception. But in the context of shrinking populations, it's key that we fundamentally rethink the way we see and treat older people. I think the issue that Darrell just raised is really important. The power of immigration, not as a humanitarian policy measure, but that of course is also important, but as a smart economic policy, which he's indicated that Canada has followed. If I go back to the Ireland example, yes, okay, the history is unique, but it is both a country of emigration and more recently a country of immigration. So, this model that Darrell is talking about, I think, is really still quite important to look at. Lastly, okay, also the COVID pandemic, absolutely agree. I mean, it's a huge challenge, but it could also lead to positive changes in the way women and men are more equally sharing unpaid work at home, in the way certain key jobs, for example, in health and social care are finally getting valued the way they need to be, and in the way that the expansion of teleworking could actually contribute to revitalizing rural areas. And I'm mentioning these examples because they illustrate, I think, very well, if we look beyond the numbers, we can see more clearly that there is vast untapped potential. And if we mobilize this potential and create more inclusive societies, there is no reason to fear demographic change. But it does require major shifts in laws and policies, in the way social support systems work, and importantly, in social norms. It means putting people first, their rights and choices. It means gender equality. It means investing in people's health and skills over the life course. But that will increase productivity, and a more productive economy can grow and expand even when population numbers go down. So Mirjana, UNFPA has set up a new demographic resilience program to support countries in finding those solutions. And in the Western Balkans, we are helping strengthen human capital, expand opportunities, and accelerate the journey to a European future. At the local level, we're already working with UNDP, with the EU, with UN Habitat to promote local development as well. I think if we get this right, and our work in Serbia right now is all about the right policy mix, the countries of the region will be well prepared to handle their demographic changes. We'll see demographically much more resilient countries. We may see an increase in fertility rates. We may see a drop in outmigration numbers. We may see a reversal in the trend towards smaller populations. But this would just be a welcome side effect of measures that will allow people, all people, to fulfill their potential and make countries stronger and more prosperous, no matter the numbers. So with that, Mirjana, thank you so much. I think with our demographic resilience program, with partners like UNDP and all of the expertise that we have here in the panel and in this forum, we are offering and providing support for each stage of this process. And I, of course, am an eternal optimist as UNFPA, so we look forward to working with you on this. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Alanna. And we are looking forward to working with you as well as with the European Union and all partners that need to be at the table and beyond. Because as I said, this is a collaborative approach that we are promoting. Nobody owns the problem and nobody will resolve the problem on its own. Now, before we wrap up, because time is running out, even though I would like to continue this conversation for much longer, I have another question for Mr. Judah. But before I go there, let me just refer to COVID because we had questions related to that as well. It is too early to see how COVID will impact on the demographic situation in Southeast Europe. But as Alanna said, every development challenge can be turned into a development opportunity, and this is what we need to look at. We are looking at the digital push COVID is giving us and how this can help us at the municipal and local level develop, close the gaps in the digital and, broaden the circle of people that can actually benefit from that transformation going forward. Just to give you an example. But now over to you, Tim. There's one question I want to more or less end with before I summarize, and this is coming back to the political will of the governments in the region. We have a question to you in particular asking whether the governments in the region are actually pro-immigration. Are they actually interested in resolving the unemployment problems and others by driving people out and benefiting from the remittances, or are they interested in keeping the population in the country because of its impact on macroeconomics and other aspects of society? Tim, over to you. We don't hear you. You need to turn the sound on. Tim?
Yes, can you hear me now?
Yeah.
I mean, I think the question implies that politicians or people in government cabinet rooms are sitting around and discussing this and saying, yeah, it would be great, we can get our unemployment numbers down a bit more if we leave. I mean, I don't think in real life it kind of works like that. I mean, I don't actually believe that politicians are sitting down and discussing the dilemma in the way that you've described it. I mean, it might be that in general terms, they're kind of quite happy that their unemployment numbers go down and remittances go up. But on the other hand, they're also kind of perfectly well aware that in the long run, if you're educated and people, your doctors and nurses and construction workers all are abroad, in the long run, that's not good. But on the other hand, maybe as politicians, they won't be there by the time that really begins to bite. So, I mean, the answer is I don't think they really kind of sit down and think about it in those terms. I mean, it's kind of like easy for us to analyze it and say, well, they must think that, but I don't think they do. I don't think that they're kind of sitting down and planning these things in any great detail, frankly. I mean, it would give them too much credit, really.
Thank you very much. I have to close. The organizers are sending me messages that I have to wrap up, but I do want to seize the opportunity again to thank you all, Ivo, Tim, Darrell, Alanna, for contributing to this really interesting discussion. But it's not a discussion, it's actually us coming together in support of the governments in the region, trying to tackle a problem that is complex, but that bears the opportunity of a better future if we do it smartly and if we come up with the right set of policy advice and investments to take this further and to plan for the society and for the population in size and composition of the future. of the future of these countries that are highly affected by depopulation. So it's not about reversing the facts, it's about building countries that people want to live in. And it is about investments into human capital. And this will mean ensuring that the process of policy making allows for integration, adaptability, and change. We have to invest in the population, no matter what size it has. And every citizen is a contribution to society, be it young children or elderly people, or in particular, and this is something that was mentioned at the very outset by Darrell, and Alanna, you said it again, the integration of women in society. I just want to remind everybody that the percentage of women in productive work is still very low in the region, and just integrating women will help address that problem from a certain angle. So women economic empowerment is an accelerator to growth, as is greening the economy, which we have heard from many speakers today. Now, tackling depopulation is exemplifying what the future of development will look like and what we need to do in terms of cooperating together. And like many other contemporary challenges, it is also one with a very long-term outlook, which means that any approach will need to span across many governments' terms in office, and as such require a constant engagement, a constant adaptation with all segments of society and across the borders of each country. And I look forward to this work together with all of you. And I want to continue the conversation, and we all will. And I would like to thank again the organizers of BSF for providing this opportunity, and for all of you to have joined this session today. Thank you. Thank you very much. Have a good rest of the day.
Svake godine iz Srbije ode 60.000 ljudi, a 40.000 ljudi umre više nego što se rodi. Znači imamo godišnje 100.000 ljudi koji nestane iz Srbije.
Srbija će da izumre, razumete? Znači, to je siguran put da jedna država nestane.
Dosta ljudi beže za Rumuniju i Austriju, pošto kod nas dosta dole u Vršcu ima gastrobajtera, kako zove oni, tamo su, ovamo su, ali većinom su tamo ljudi, sela su nam oko Vršca, jedna kuća ima pa 3 prazne, pa jedna kuća ima pa 3 prazne, sela su od 1000 i nešto ljudi koje je pre živjelo, sad imaš možda 300-400 stanovnika svega, deca uopšte nema po selima. Imam porodicu, imam ženu i 2 dece, živim ovdje u Srbiji, sad sam trenutno u Beogradu, radim ovdje, tako da je okej, ne planiram da idem nigde za sada.
Iskreno ne želim da odgajam svoje dete ovdje, ne želim da odrasta ovdje, ne želim ja da budem nešto preterano dugo da se zadržavam, ali ne bi ni da idem.
Pa ja mislim da bi trebali mladi što više da se žene, devojke da se udaju, da rađaju decu, da raste natalitet.
Sestra mi je u Americi, tako da ja planiram tamo. Nemamo budućnost, ali stvarno je nemamo. Nije čudo što ljudi ne mogu da imaju decu, mislim, ja nemam za sebe, nemam za kera, odakle mi za dete.
Pa mislim da je to kumovalo nekoliko stvari, od jako pogrešne populacione politike, uslova života, ja bih rekao jako okrutnih uslova života koje traju ovde od 1991. godine, 1991. I mislim da to ljudi jednostavno neće više da podnose.
Prvo ću ja da odem već sledeće godine.
Što?
Pa naše školovanje, naši fakulteti, posle fakulteta nemamo posla, nemamo ništa. Jedino preko veze ako platimo nešto. Što je jako bez veze, jako loše, jer je država jako lepa, grad je jako lep, sve je jako lepo.
Dakle, kad ste obrazovani da možete da uđete u poziciju da donosite odluke za društvo, ne samo za sebe, u tom trenutku će situacija možda biti bolja. Dakle, nije pitanje ekonomije i kulture, pitanje ambijenta koji mora ponovo da se stvori iz početka.
Pa da se obrati pažnja na mlade, na našu budućnost, naše poslove, da se mi zapošljavamo, da se obrati pažnja na nas, na naše razmišljanje, naše stavove.
Mi smo imali neke planove drugi, ali smo dobili njega, pa je sad to malo stopirano.
Ostajemo i malo još ovde, ali možda će biti neki mali Amerikanac ili Šveđanin ili nešto.
Nemaju ljudi posao, nema ništa. Svaki hoće da preživi, hoćemo da idemo da možda radimo, da zaradimo nešto, da imamo da živimo. Nećemo mi milione, ali kad nema posao, šta ćemo? Moramo preko. Baš i ja se razmislim da idem negdje, ali ne znam gde ću, da li ću u Španiju, ne znam, Amerika me je nešto mnogo daleko, a imam posao super tamo, ali daleko mi je. Kad ću da se vratim posle? Nema toga ništa.
Imamo neki problem kao društvo, mislim mislimo da smo dobri, ali da smo u suštini loši.
Da recimo žene koje imaju 2, 3 dece da imaju prednost pri zapošljavanju, što upravo i nije, što se i ne dešava ovde. Ili recimo majke koje imaju 3, 4 dece da dobiju povoljnije kredite za stan.
Nama nije toliko loše, ali mislimo da može da nam bude bolje negde.
Sretan vam put.
Hvala.